Almost everyone admits that we need more affordable housing. But should homeowners be allowed to rent out their garages? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Many communities allow residents to convert their garages into living spaces. These conversions are commonly known as residential second units. These units have become a problem in the city of East Palo Alto, where groups of residents have spoken before the East Palo Alto City Council and with city staff to protest the enforcement of city building codes that have led to the evictions of families who are living throughout the city in converted garages. Advocacy groups say that these units should be allowed given the shortage of available affordable housing. City officials say many of the converted garages do not meet the city's building codes and are illegal. On this show, my three guests will shed more light on the need for and the legality of converted garages. Steward Hyland is seated on my far right. Steward is an East Palo Alto resident and an action leader with the St. Francis of Assisi Faith in Action Bay Area, an advocacy group formerly known as Peninsula Interfaith Action. Sister Trinitas Hernandez is the executive director of the Rosalie Rendu Center, a nonprofit organization in East Palo Alto, which provides free English classes for city residents. Sean Charpentier is seated on my right. Sean is the Assistant City Manager for the City of East Palo Alto. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your being with me here on the show. Now, I mentioned evictions in the city of East Palo Alto. Is this a real problem now, or is this maybe one or two people who've been involved?
Well, we know of at least 4 families that have been affected by it directly. And probably the most affected person I can think of is a woman, I'll just use her first name, Griselda, who is living in her car right now. Her children are in different places from her, but she wasn't able to get housing as they were able to be placed, so she's been living in her car for a while. Since the eviction, I believe, took place about the middle or the end of August. And that was, and she was notified under a 10-day eviction, so she had very little time to even try to prepare for that.
So could you confirm or speak to is it a fact that people are given 10-day eviction notices?
So the city of East Palo Alto is required by state law to uphold the state building codes. It's not the city's building codes. We're required by law to uphold the state building codes. And the city does more to encourage affordable housing within its boundary than any other city. In 2014, the City Council adopted a wide-ranging and groundbreaking second unit and garage conversion ordinance. Now that ordinance, and I'll read some of it, which is important, the goals of it were to increase the supply of affordable housing, to establish standards for the development and occupancy of second units to ensure that they are compatible with neighboring uses and structures, adequately equipped with public utility services, and safe for human occupancy, and to restrict or prohibit second units which create unreasonable traffic, safety, privacy, or other adverse impacts.
So, given that it said this is the state's code, not the city's, and given the city right now effort in terms of, as the ordinances were designed to increase affordable housing, what's the problem?
The problem is municipalities also in that state code, and this is under the Housing Secretary Cresswell in 2006 or 2007, was to give flexibility to municipalities to design the code that works for their local situation, whatever that municipality may have around open space issues or or as we stated, our goal is around affordable housing, which does align with what the state of California wants to do. The way the law is set up is municipalities have flexibility to design something that works for them.
Sister Trinitas,
Yes.
I see you shaking your head.
Well, I remember in 2014 when they had the meeting, and people, I've not been involved so much with it, but because of my position, I hear from the ladies who live in these houses, and my interest, because they're so anxious about it. And in 2014, there was they knew that, well, okay, we can stay here in our places. And I mean, I think it's a good thing that they are in the garages if they're safe, and that was the whole thing, when they are safe and under code. But the whole thing with 10-day notices and short-term, and where do they go now because of the money? I mean, things are so hard for, the rents are so high now, and so it's very, very difficult for people now to find a place to go.
Sure, and we just now heard Steward talking about municipalities having the option to design or to enforce the laws according to their particular situations.
And that is what we've done. The challenge is there's a threshold, and it's referred to as the imminent hazard threshold. And if there's an imminent hazard, and they're defined as open electrical wires, structural failures, emergency escape impediment, unsanitary situations, or gas burning appliances in bedrooms, then they really should not have more than 10 days if they are considered to be an imminent hazard.
So
and that
is it
that is what
possible-
our building staff, all on a complaint basis, have noticed in the cases where there have been displacements due to unsafe and illegal structures.
So is it possible, rather than giving 10-day evictions, to give people less than that time to fix the hazard?
It's possible to do fewer than 10 days, and that would be called for if they felt like people if the hazard were even greater. But in general, in the worst case situations, they've been given 10 days. So it's possible to go fewer than 10 days.
Fewer than 10 days to fix
If you
the
feel like,
problem.
yes,
to fix the problem.
Yes, it's possible to go fewer than 10 days if it's an imminent
So
hazard issue.
are people giving that option? I've heard that they've simply been given 10 days eviction and that's it, and they have to get out.
Well, that's because there's been an imminent hazard there, whether it's an open electrical line, an unsanitary
But I think
situation.
Henrietta's point is if it's fixed.
Yes.
Is that sounds like the point you're trying to
Well,
make.
are people told that if you can get this fixed within the 10 days or before the 10 days?
Oh, well, so basically, we estimate right now that our whole system works on a complaint basis. So we don't go out and look for people. We don't go out and look for second units. Somebody calls or writes to our office and says, I have a concern about this building because of overcrowding, unsafe structure, maybe too many cars parked in the street, garbage. And then we send out a code inspector to review the complaint. And this is a complaint that we receive as a city, and we have to follow up on it. And then at that time, they do an inspection, and then that inspection leads them to a determination of, is this an imminent hazard or is it a nuisance? So right now, we have approximately 31 complaint-based red tags, and most of these red tags are for secondary units, not the primary structure. And of those, 75% of them are in the process of being abated by the landowner in some form or another. So they do have the option.
Time to resolve it?
So they do, but again, the people can't be living there at 10 days
During the
after if it's
time.
still unsafe.
So
And the other challenge, there are challenges that can't be fixed within 10 days. I mean, some of these were built in very unsafe, or they're not built to code, and it's not necessarily something that can be fixed in 10 days. But our department is very flexible on working with people to fix them as long as they're making good progress. But if they're an imminent hazard, people can't live there.
So is this something that you all are aware of?
We are aware that but we're also thinking that there's probably levels of what these hazards are. Some are more imminent than others. Some are easier to fix than others. In some cases, it's fire alarms aren't in all of the bedrooms where they're located, where that's something that can be easily resolved. And it seems that if you put a red tag on any of those, that's a 10-day eviction notice. And I do have a question about that. But if you put a red tag, that's a 10-day eviction notice on something that may have a lower priority or a lower danger to someone, you just really exacerbate the problem about affordable housing and availability. The follow-up to what I just said, though, is our pastor at St. Francis of Assisi, Father Goody, was speaking with a city council person who said when he looked at the law, he thought that there was actually up to 30 days. It's just that the city tended to always do 10-day evictions on these things, that there's some flexibility on that, and it's around prioritizing what the hazard is. So, I mean, I would like to know more about that if you're aware of that.
Well, I think we're saying the same thing. If it's an imminent hazard, it has to be 10 days.
And
yeah,
if
but we're
it's
not about the 30 days, though, because there doesn't seem to be an
If
in-between.
it's not, then the state code, I believe, says that it can go up to 30 days if it's not an imminent hazard.
No,
But the threshold for 10 days is the imminent hazard.
sure. Sister Trinitas, do
Well,
you?
it just, I don't know, it just seems to me that they don't, from my, and again, I'm kind of an outsider, I realize that. But the people don't seem to understand that they have even the 10 days maybe to get it fixed. I mean, and I, you know what I mean? And from my understanding, even they don't understand why people are coming knocking on their doors, and some people haven't even been presented with a complaint, as you're saying. So that it seems like, you know, if people see a garage, that's what, now again, I'm hearing it from the people, and I know it's hearsay, that, but it's a concern because they feel like they're being pushed out. And the whole, you know, gentrification keeps ringing in my ear, and it frightens me. Mm-hmm. It really does. And I think that the laws are made for the protection of the people, not to frighten them and to. If a person gets a red tag, then they need to understand that, well, okay, this is what has to be done. You put a window on, you move the water heater out, and I think, I mean, that's almost impossible for some of them because that costs a lot of money. But there might be people, and I think that's what Father Goody was saying, that he would, if we could rally maybe different groups to help to bring things up to code, instead of feeling like that we don't want you anymore. I mean, and that, I know I come from a whole different base, but I mean, that's where I come from.
I mean,
that's my mission in life.
I think there's a lot of overlap, perfect overlap in your mission and the mission of the City Council, and no other City Council in the Bay Area has done as much for affordable housing as East Palo Alto. That's why 40% of our housing units are affordable. That's why we're 4% of the population, but we have 22% of the emergency shelter beds in the county. Yeah. And that's why it's an issue. I mean, in other cities this happens all the time, and no one, the City Council doesn't grapple with it this way.
Well, just the fact that the city does have the record and the background that you just now mentioned, that's why it seems so odd or so out of place that the city is caught up now with its residents protesting 10-day eviction notices with policies that the city is enforcing that are putting people out in the streets.
And one of the particular places, and I did sit in on the inspection with the building director, Chris Gale, sitting around the table, and he was breaking down all the things that are wrong with this person's house. Those tenants, one tenant was a 10-year tenant, the other tenant was a 5-year tenant. And I know you talked about imminent hazard for the 10-day evictions, but if they managed to live there 5 and 10 years in relative health, no one seemed to have a complaint until the 10-day eviction came, it seems like they could have been given more time to resolve the problem because the imminent hazards didn't seem to bear out as a danger. And from what I heard of the list, the imminent hazards were relatively easy to fix. It was more structural problems. Like maybe there wasn't a cement foundation, but the imminent hazard seemed to be the electrical wires that were out, which seemed like a really easy repair to get done. And also they were missing fire alarms. I mean, those are two things that didn't seem to need an eviction and could have been resolved fairly quickly.
Sean, let's give him a chance.
So we had six major fires in the city in the last 12 months or so. And, you know, fires are often a result, some of them are just human error. You leave a pot on the stove. Some of them are a result of of illegal construction and problems with wiring. And it's the building code's job to prevent those. I mean, the building code was created 100 years ago by people in New York and Chicago, very much like yourselves, to protect people, poor people, immigrants. And the city is responsible to uphold that and to also enforce it. So when we get a complaint and we act on it, which we're responsible to do, and the code enforcement officer or the building official sees something that is a violation of the building code, it has to be reported and acted upon.
So let's go back to those 6 fires. Do you know the cause of those 6 fires?
We're looking into it.
Oh,
But some
okay.
of them are definitely, some of them have been associated with started in garages and things of
But
that sort.
we don't know exactly at this point exactly what the causes were.
No.
Oh, okay. Now, you said that the building inspectors go out when there is a complaint.
Yes.
There were so many people who protested at City Hall who seemed to indicate that their houses were just picked at random, where city inspectors came in without notifying them, or
There was definitely one testimony about that. I'm not going to bring up the inspector's name, but it's an inspector who's gotten lots of complaints from the folks we've talked to at St. Francis. It was unannounced, and the inspector also did not say, "I'm coming because of a complaint about your place."
Yes, I didn't hear from the people who spoke at City Hall, and we do have a photo that we could show of the meeting at City Hall, if you could pull it up, with everybody sitting in the community, in the City Hall chambers. Yeah, that picture. We did not hear anybody saying that people came to their houses because of a complaint.
And
Well, may I finish?
sure,
So,
I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. So, you know, the city has the best staff around. We ask them to do more than any other city, and the building division has excellent staff. 71% of them are bilingual. They have a very high percentage of people who live in the city. The process for dealing with a complaint is you make an appointment with the homeowner. The homeowner does not have to let you in.
But you make an appointment with the homeowner.
Yes.
So the homeowner is notified.
Yes.
Or should be.
How far in advance?
It depends. We make
But
an
I mean,
appointment
you don't
as
call
soon-
that morning and make the appointment.
if
Nobody's
they try to
there.
if they're there, but the homeowner says, I'm at work, I'll be back later. So they schedule an appointment with the homeowner.
Well, most of the complaints were that people showed up unannounced and
Yeah,
were going through people's garages or their houses.
So
and-
if the homeowner, they make an appointment, the homeowner brings them in and shows them the garage or the house. That's the way the process works. I don't expect everybody to be happy with what they're being told. It's code enforcement. I mean, they're there for a reason. They got a complaint, and they're there to inspect the compliance with the building codes. That being said, we'll always be interested in improving our level of service,
Right.
but this is a common issue that we hear, whether it's now or later. And in terms of the timing of some of these things, some of these homes have been open code cases for 4 years, multiple years.
And
And
nothing
have there
was done
been
4 years ago.
have there been evictions in those cases?
I don't know.
Ah,
No, that's one problem. I know you speak highly of the staff, but I would also say that it's been inconsistent over time,
Yeah.
where even under different city managers, they've made less of an emphasis on the actual code violations as opposed to, is the structure reasonably habitable right now, and are you actually helping folks with affordable rents, which is the big deal from this side. Most of the folks that are getting evicted didn't move, even though these were supposedly hazardous and substandard construction. It was affordable living for them, and they were very comfortable. And I go back to the 5 and 10-year folks who those folks that were evicted actually had fairly good jobs where they probably could have relocated to another apartment and paid a much higher rent and made it work. But because it was affordable rent and because it was reasonable habitation, they were comfortable where they were for 5 or 10 years before they were evicted. And so what we're pushing with Faith in Action is making a recommendation to the city at the October 18th City Council meeting, along with staff, about how to go forward to really meet this goal. Because we set a high bar as a leader of housing on the peninsula. It doesn't mean we stop leading in that. It doesn't mean we don't stop pushing the boundaries and try to stay innovative and keeping our folks here. So that's one of the reasons why we really look forward to having that October 18th meeting to talk about it. But I think if we spend time defending where we were, it's going to make it hard to open our eyes and set that lens for readjusting for a higher bar.
Sister Trinitas.
And I don't think everybody is should stay in where they are, because I agree. Some of the things that we heard in the meeting were very unsafe. But I guess what I don't understand, Sean, is that because I went with a lady because she had corrected she had a trailer, she was asked to bring it down, and she did. And when we went there, the officer said, well, where's your paper? She said, I wasn't given anything. Took her name and address, looked in the computer, there was nothing. So, I mean, she wasn't served with anything. She was just word of mouth, said, here, get rid of this, and she did. But it was just interesting. So it's kind of what you're saying, it doesn't always happen. And this isn't hearsay, because we were there. I mean, I was there.
So what happened?
Well, she tore it down, and then he said...
And when he said he didn't see anything in the computer or anything...
And she had taken pictures, and she said, I just want you to know I did. And he said, well, we still have to go by and see it. She said, fine, go see it. It's gone.
But they didn't have a record of a complaint or anything in the computer?
No, nothing. And so she said, well, would you please send me a paper to let me know? I mean, she's a very smart, intelligent woman. She just doesn't speak very good English, but she's very intelligent. And she said, but would you send me something so that if somebody comes back, I can say I have the record? And I assume they did that.
So the standard process is to receive a complaint, schedule an inspection, and return with a report or some written notification.
And they didn't say, we have received a complaint about this either. The person that did that didn't say it. And I mean, I know nobody's perfect also, but I don't think we're in a perfect world either. Mm-hmm. But I think that almost every case has to be looked at individually. And it has to be so that it's not, it's just there's so many people getting hurt and frightened. And some of it is, certainly you're not going to evict somebody because they haven't put a battery in their fire extinguisher.
Yeah. That would not be an imminent hazard.
No, I wouldn't think so either.
The city has, if you could tell us, how many inspectors, code enforcement officials, and what kind of training are they given? And is there someone who oversees what it is that they're doing?
So the chief building official is responsible for the building division, and then there are 3 code enforcement officers and 1 building inspector and 2 permit technicians. The code enforcement officers are the ones that work primarily in the field. And they are required to receive training in building code, understanding the building codes, the process for filing complaints, and quite a few other items. I can get you a list of that. And they are overseen by the chief building official, and he's part of the Community and Economic Development Division, and I oversee the whole Community and Economic Development Division.
Now, there are complaints coming in about the procedures that have been followed, the court enforcement officers. Are those complaints being looked at?
Which complaints?
The complaints that the residents have.
For example, a specific code enforcement officer?
Well, I'm just thinking maybe about the conduct of an officer about an eviction notice that's been given that they think might be unfair. So is there some right of appeal?
They have a hearing, and they can come in and appeal it at a hearing and discuss it at a hearing if they'd like. And in terms of complaints about staff, we take all of them.
Who staffs the hearing?
The building division.
And how are those? So if somebody's given a 10-day notice,
yes,
they can apply for a hearing.
No.
Can you give us the details on the hearing? No, I'm just asking for the details on the hearing officer.
Before we get to that, what I just now said is, if you could tell us if someone's given an eviction notice, what's their right of appeal?
So the eviction notice goes to the tenant. The landowner receives the information about the code violations, and the people who are being evicted are informed of their rights as tenants, because the landlord is wholly and 100% responsible for any costs incurred by that tenant for relocation, because they leased out an unsafe structure. So
And-
what we've done is we've had workshops when we knew that there were several homes where this was going on. We had workshops where we brought in all of the social service agencies in the emergency shelter, and we had them in a table, and we notified the tenants, and we said, come in and ask them about services that are available because your building is unsafe.
Was this before?
That
Was this
notification didn't
before?
work. The notification did not work for two tenants because Carlota's tenants who were there, they both said the address was not the correct address. When they appeared, there was no one there.
So I know they had at least one meeting for that house, and no one showed up for it. If there was some mistake in the address, I don't know. We had multiple staff there and social service providers there.
Now,
I've been at them before where many tenants showed up, so I know the system works.
Is this after the eviction notices or before the eviction notices?
At the same time, generally.
So I find it very interesting you mentioned the rights of the tenants. We'll get to the hearings, but you mentioned the rights of the tenants. And so if a homeowner is given an eviction notice, and you said it goes to the homeowner, and the tenants have rights, and you said the homeowner is then responsible for the relocation costs of the tenants?
Yes.
Is this information given to the tenants?
Yes, of
Because
course.
the people who are homeless in their cars, they could always turn around to the homeowner and say, I have to move out.
We
More
give
poor
them,
people can sue more poor people.
we give them we give them the contact information for the nonprofit legal groups that support tenants. The same thing we do with multifamily if you're in an apartment building. So we give them the contact information for CLS and for San Mateo County, San Mateo Community Legal Services.
With the eviction notice.
The Legal Aid Society of San Mateo, and then Community Legal Services of
in
East Palo Alto.
And then when one of these actions occurs, we ask the owner, please give us the information, contact information for all your tenants, because we want to inform them of the services available to them and also of their rights, which is the same thing we would do if they were the tenants of a large apartment complex.
So, and I'm sure there might be some questions coming here, but does the city sit and work with the homeowners if there are code violations? Can the homeowners sit down with somebody in the building department and work up some type of procedures or steps for getting it fixed?
Yes. So 75% of the cases right now are being actively remediated by the owners.
And
Now
the other
the city has
25?
not imposed any penalties on any of these, because our goal is for safe housing, not to penalize people,
on
but
the
to get the
Henrietta?
housing to a safe stage
Henrietta, may I
if
ask just a
possible.
procedural question? When she holds up 30, does that mean 30 seconds or 30 minutes?
That's not something of concern to you.
It is concerned because I want to get in some questions before this is over.
Excuse me, Steward, that is not something to be concerned about. If you have a question, please ask it.
When you talk about the hearing, how is it, so my concern is it an outside person or is it just all internal within the building department as far as hearing?
So hearing was the wrong word. We have a meeting with the owner, and we walk him through, him or her
So that's
through
not
the
an
case.
appeal process, or?
I believe there is an appeal process. I'd have to check the code. I mean, honestly, I deal with a million different issues of the day. There are things that I need to know. I look it up. If you want to go through the appeal process, I can look it up and get back to you.
Yeah, because it's really important to try to resolve this before folks are evicted and out in the street sleeping in their cars, which is what we have. That's the worst of it. My other question is, when you were talking about additional units, we talked about garages, but there's also units separate from the houses completely. They could be sheds, they could be cottages.
Mm-hmm.
How does the code work for that if a person actually wanted to build a cottage separate from their home?
So that is probably the best instance of the new ordinance. So the new ordinance that the council approved in 2014 outlines the standards for those types of developments. So it has to be X feet from the fence, X feet from the property line. It has to provide a parking space. It has to be built to code. So that's all in the second unit ordinance. The challenge is what we have
What's the
within
minimum
the
square
code.
foot to build?
It's 700
Well,
something. I could look it up.
You were about to say the challenges.
The challenges that we have, and it's heart-rending. We are like the ones who are dealing with the worst of the housing crisis, and it's happening in the worst way in the community that cares about it the most. I mean, we're here because East Palo Alto exists to provide affordable housing. I mean, that's why, in part, it was created. It was affordable housing, police force, and land use control.
Yeah.
And it's heart-rending, but the challenges that exist with the ones we have in the process are, a lot of them were built and they did not conform to the new ordinance. That's the challenge. So for some of the second units, maybe they're too close, maybe they can't make the parking, we don't know. But when the owner comes in and they start to work with building, the goal is to try to help them figure out, does this meet the standards, the new standards?
So,
and if so, can you, and that process would be kind of, can you legalize what's there?
Sure. Now, some residents are asking for a moratorium. I guess this is a moratorium on the enforcement of the current housing codes. Does the city have any leeway when it comes to granting a moratorium? Or
would it be a moratorium on responding to people's complaints about unsafe buildings?
Or maybe a moratorium on evictions?
Because the city is required by law to enforce the state building code. And that's where we go back to the eminent hazards.
I can speak on the moratorium because we're the group that's doing it.
Well, feel free.
Yeah. So one of the goals of the moratorium is to prevent or extend the time for eviction so that folks can actually have time to come up with a first and a last and maybe work out something with their landlord on returning some of the rent that they paid. But it is a recommendation at this point of extending that time beyond 10 days evictions to maybe a maximum of 90 or 60 days in between is what we're looking at.
And what Father had said to is
Father Goody,
a time so that if the landlord can bring it up to code, so that that's what my understanding was, to instead of 10 days extend the time so that they'd have time to bring it up to code.
And to be fair to building, I mean, the building director has been really clear about that. If you're making progress, if an owner is making progress, he'll give time, as the inspectors come, if they see some work being done. The problem is really around evictions and not really having facilities or housing, because there's too many homeless already in the peninsula. So if you throw another family there, even if you have your social groups, they're liable not to be able to place each other, which is what happened to a lot of our people too. A lot of folks have gone to El Concilio and they've not had room in shelters. They're put on a waiting list. And as you're saying, it's heart-rending. I know you're sincere about that, and I know staff wants to try to do something about that, but we're gonna have to not be in a defensive stance and look at what can we do creatively with the law to make this work.
Now, in terms of the moratorium, what are the possibilities in what the group is asking for? Of who is it within the city who can?
So is it a moratorium means one thing?
Well, he just now explained what the group was asking for, a moratorium in terms of giving people more time, moving the 10-day eviction perhaps to
the 60 or 90.
So
okay, that's one thing.
Okay.
So
it all comes down to on whether it's an imminent hazard. And if it's an imminent hazard, under those conditions, exposed electrical, unsanitary, gas appliance in a bedroom, structurally unsound, fire escapes or access impeded for emergency, then the 10 days is the 10 days.
So can the city work with the homeowner where it can say, look, we know people who can fix this. It would be at your cost. Do you want to hire them? I mean, is there some way the city can work with the homeowner who is interested in working with the city?
I guess there is. I mean, how do we select the contractors? Do we? I mean, it's fraught with a whole bunch of technicalities and details. Our goal is the city council's goal and direction is really clear, and that is to expand the number of second units that are affordable and safe, and that's what was in the 2014 ordinance. The city doesn't do architectural work for private owners or public owners or do contracting for them. But if somebody came in and said, here's my contractor, I'm going to fix this in this way, and it met planning, it still has to meet planning codes, which are different from building. Planning is parking and building setback. Then the city would be very happy.
Does that have to go to the planning commission?
Usually not.
Oh, okay.
I want to give
so
that caveat. Usually not.
Okay, so that's something. If somebody's given a 10-day eviction notice and they come in with a plan and said, I'd like to work with such and such, can that plan be approved within that 10-day period? And would the person still have 10 days in which to get it fixed?
You have basically the 10-day period is for the imminent hazard. So that
Yes.
imminent hazard, if that imminent hazard still exists after the 10 days, then the person shouldn't be there.
So it'd be pretty difficult to fix an imminent hazard in 10 days.
It is.
So then that family would have to either go to a motel or something. I mean, and there are groups, and we've looked into them, but it's going to take more than 10 days.
Well, according to the city, that family can go to a motel at the expense of the homeowner.
That's true, but and the problem, of course, with that is, Henrietta, is that the homeowners, some of them are poor people
I know,
themselves.
they're not
and
some
in order
rich-
to make their mortgage, they've rented out their garage and tried to fix it as best unfortunately, without getting permission.
But it's a way for them to fight gentrification too, to be able to keep their home.
Yes.
But just to follow up on what Sister T was saying, that there are some construction groups that we've been in discussion with that may be willing to donate or do some work at not their usual cost.
But they're going to have to sit
for an
down with the
emergency
city.
case, right?
And they need to sit down with somebody for the city too to see how. I mean, this is not going to be something that's going to be done in tomorrow. But if we could, because I know we'd have to have a committee and set up something with someone in the city. So we would hopefully, if this one particular group will work with us, if we'll have to get somebody from the city and sit down and have a committee to say, okay, what does the city's limit, or what are you going to say? Okay, this has to be done. It has to be done in order. And I'm not organized, but I think other people help me to keep going. But
You're organized.
Yeah, that's not true.
You've been running Rosalie Rendu for.
Talking about humility.
Oh my goodness! Seriously.
No, I'm not. But anyway, because even people have talked about. I know, what is it? Rebuilding Together.
Yes.
I don't know that group really, but I know that they're taking applications now, and so I want to contact them to see would they have an interest in working with. And it's really the city that they have to work with. I'm just kind of nudging people to
The city and the homeowner. I mean,
city
has
and the
to be,
homeowner.
it
And the
has to
homeowner,
reach
yeah,
some type
okay.
of agreement.
Yeah.
We would welcome that
Okay.
type of assistance.
Maybe Habitat too. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be an excellent way to leverage resources, and if it could be added to also the addition of units, that would be good too. There are complexities, challenging complexities with something that's been built not to code and then bringing it up to code. It's not always as easy as we would like.
Right.
But
So-
those sorts of resources would be very much welcome.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the October 18th meeting where the city council is going to look at this issue,
The
right?
black guy.
Steward,
did it.
But you did mention, did you, a time when the city's going to?
the city council is going to.
It is on the
we're
city
preparing
council's
a staff
agenda.
report for the 18th. It's going to talk about these issues.
Okay, now
And
that's...
also, I believe Mr. Hyland's going to present a white paper or prepare one.
We haven't decided who's going to do it, but I'm working on the preparation. And we do have some construction folks involved. Rebuilding Together's agreed to send a representative to at least look over the paper. That's not a commitment beyond
Oh, but
looking
that's
over
good,
input
good.
into the paper.
So, and that's really constructive.
Yes,
I
it
mean,
is.
there's city staff who see it one way, and then there's people in the community who might say, well, look at it this way. Or
Yes.
maybe approach it from this angle, and then together, I mean, I think that's how East Palo Alto works best, is looking at trying to resolve these really difficult issues from a variety of perspectives.
And I mentioned that meeting because the city staff, as you mentioned, will be making recommendations to the city council. And since you are on that, since
You're gonna put me on the spot?
No, but since you are the person who would be putting those recommendations together, could you give us an idea of some of the possibilities?
I can't right now. We're still working on them, and I'm not trying to be evasive.
Oh, I
We have a
understand
very big
completely.
meeting on the 4th. The council's going to be asked to adopt the general plan, and that's consumed a lot of our resources. And that's one of the reasons why this item couldn't be on the agenda until the 18th.
Okay.
We are working on it.
Sure.
We had a research meeting with Sean and also his boss, Carlos Martinez, earlier this week. And kind of putting you on the spot from what Henrietta said, you did mention something about a possible resource pool, but you weren't very detailed about it.
So one thing that we did, and because it's who we are, and we know that there's a human cost to this, is, and this was before this became a big issue, staff recommended and council approved $10,000 in the budget. And the vision was it was to provide some kind of assistance in these cases. Now the landowner would still be, the homeowner would still be responsible for repaying that, but it might bridge the gap and provide, and what we had originally conceptualized is possibly, this isn't our skill set, but if somebody said, this person was displaced because of an unsafe building and I can find them a place in 2 weeks, but I need 2 weeks in a motel or something.
Sure.
So trying to set up that kind of a process to do this as humanely and as compassionately as possible. And that is one of the things that we're going to discuss on the 18th. Thank you, Stewart.
Absolutely.
So is
And
there
what I'm
anything?
also hearing is it could be used maybe for first and last. I mean, there's a variety of options, and I think that that's a conversation we'd like to have with the council and the community about how do we best use this to minimize the impact.
Sure.
That's a
I
good
mean,
thing.
given the city's history when it comes to affordable housing, one would expect that the city would be looking into some of the options like that. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the family that was evicted, the woman who's living in her car and her children in different places, is there anything that can be done retroactively? I mean, will the city be looking for families that might have been displaced, or what can be done, given the number of homeless already on the streets?
I don't have an answer for that right now. I mean, like I said, we have 4% of the population and 22% of the homeless beds.
So the question is, yes, there is imminent danger, but what's the greater imminent danger? Having people homeless, living in their cars, or living in unsafe conditions that might not create an imminent problem?
Well, we're required to uphold the state building code.
Okay,
and
now,
the risk from being in one of those units, and if something goes wrong, is truly catastrophic, both to the person who's living in the unit, the person who's living in the house, potentially their neighbors if fire spreads.
yes, and also I'm thinking the imminent danger of living out on the streets.
Right.
So it seems it's the devil in the deep. One danger is as bad as the other
Right,
danger, but at
right.
least in one danger, people have shelter. So is there anything that can be done in terms of the state? I mean, can the city go to the state and say, we're having this problem? Is there something that we can do right now to suspend the law until we can get this straightened out?
On
Or
the building
until we
code?
could-
No.
Nothing whatsoever.
No.
Are there?
Now, this is a statewide national issue. Every city's grappling with this in some form. Every major city, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, San Jose, every last one of them, the major cities that show a concern about these topics is grappling with this issue.
Do you know of any options that other cities might be exploring?
So the options for, and this is something we're going to be looking at in our affordable housing strategy, I mean, the options for resolving homelessness are an emergency shelter, transitional housing, or permanent supportive housing, all of which have cost and allocate resources.
Well, there is an emergency shelter, I think, in
There
East
is.
Palo Alto.
There is Project
So
Remote.
is there something being done to maybe expand that facility?
So we've brought, they're part of the social service groups that come in. And anecdotally, they've told me that from the displacement from unsafe habitations, they haven't seen any more people show up because of that to their shelter. Now, anecdotally, they've said that.
No,
And
is
maybe
it
folks
possible?
are unaware. I mean, because it's a different population. It's a
Most is.
predominantly, well, no, but I was going to say
Families.
predominantly Spanish-speaking may not be as well aware of Project We Hope. And I don't know if the woman whose children got placed and she wasn't getting a placement actually went to the social services gathering. I'm going to check back with her and see if she did get that aid. But Project We Hope, because it's adult, tends to be, and I know this from having to house somebody in my own relatives who didn't like that setting. There were two women, a mom and a daughter. They're both adults, but they didn't like being in that setting. It was just too open for them to have the cots out that way.
It was hard, I think, for women.
Well, for families, it's not even appropriate.
Yeah,
they
it is
don't
not
take
a
kids.
family
They don't take
shelter. It
children.
is not a
It's
family
adults,
shelter.
single adults, basically.
From what I understand, is for men, mostly, isn't it?
Well, some
Primarily?
women, there's some women who could probably put up with it, and
Yeah.
they wouldn't turn away a woman. I wouldn't. That's not the way Project We Hope
Right.
works. But it's just a lot of
Yeah.
women don't feel comfortable in that setting.
I think this is emblematic of the complexity. And
Yes, and I'm thinking, you know, I can remember some years ago an architect was building homes, very small houses or homes that homeless people could use. Is that even a consideration where there might be some temporary structures on city land, even opposite City Hall?
Those are the things he's trying to get rid of right now.
Vacant lots.
Yeah, vacant lots.
Great idea. We didn't think of a tent city yet.
Well, it is an option.
I mean, we've tried to encourage private garage conversions and second units in guest homes. The mini housing strategy, I think, is sort of a pioneering way to address it. Oftentimes, it's hard to get the kind of density that we would need, or that would make the investment worthwhile, because it requires a lot of investment. You need infrastructure. It needs to structurally work. It's even with an RV park, you still need infrastructure. You need to make sure that it's safe. I mean, it's very, very complicated. And at the end of the day, it might be easier just to build some housing somewhere.
So just as an example, that's what Seattle's doing with cottages. But what they did was they redesigned their ordinance to maximize the number of cottages that could be built. So instead of having a larger lot size, like a 6,000 square foot lot, they reduced it to a 4,000 square foot lot. And they also took into account what type of tenants would live in the cottages, so there wouldn't be like a vehicle impact. If you're near like a transit hub, you can get a waiver, so they would say you don't need a parking space because your tenant probably doesn't have enough money and can get on public transportation, which is really handy right there. So it enabled it. And their goal really, when they redesigned their law, was to reduce the barriers to producing cottages, which one of our problems is I think we're not thinking that thoughtfully about where we could reduce the barriers. There may be zones where higher density without impacting parking is less of an issue.
Well, supposedly crises give way to opportunities. And when Steward mentioned perhaps opening up his home to several people, I think you did say that.
I did.
Is it possible, I'm just thinking as a possibility, to find out who in the city of East Palo Alto might have temporary space for people who are being evicted? And is there some type of credits they might be given for opening up their homes on a temporary basis?
I think Father has several families living in the hall, in the parish hall, or he has opened the parish hall.
So there are lots of options.
Because he was looking for cots.
Or some options.
Oh, that's a call to other faith houses.
Yeah, we have a lot of churches in East Palo Alto.
I don't know. I mean, it's co-housing. I don't know.
It's a real
would we?
hard issue. Because you're talking about building cottages, that's long term. I mean, that's not anything that's going to take 60 to 90 days even. We are really talking about two issues, I think. The immediate issue.
Well, there are temporary structures. I know there used to be a resource center on Bay Road for nonprofits. And I'm just thinking, like a Quonset hut. There are all kinds of rental structures that one could purchase. And if you had a lot to put them on, that would make temporary housing for people.
Yeah, Peninsula Community Center put those portables up. Where that center first was, where we eventually became Rainbowswood Family Health Center, and they built the structure. But
yes,
yes.
I had an office in there once, so
you
I'm
did.
familiar with it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in the few moments that we have left, and we do have more than a few moments, I'm thinking, is there something from the city's vantage point in terms of codes that you could share with us as a way of addressing this particular issue?
I think that the city, I don't speak for the city council, but historically the city council has been very supportive and involved in affordable housing, and it's shown in where we are with the amount of affordable housing we have with the second unit ordinance. And I think Councilmember Abrica said it well at one of the meetings when this was discussed. You know, we don't shy away from these difficult discussions, and they are difficult, and there's no single answer.
That's true.
But I think council and staff are committed to finding some way to be able to meet our state mandate to enforce our building code, and also ensure that it's done in as humane and as compassionate as a manner as possible. I mean, the real victims here are the people living in the unsafe structures.
That's true. And the concern that came out was that what happens to these people in the meantime before that October 18th meeting?
I still have a problem with unsafe structures where people have lived for 5 or 10 years. I've got relatives that live in the deep south and live in Mexico, and sometimes what's not exactly right actually works. You know, you're still warm, you're still safe, you're still dry. There's some things that could be better, or that could be fixed over time and given notice to landlords. But to have poor people who move out because they're evicted go back and sue their poor landlords is really a terrible situation. It adds to it exacerbates the problem in more ways than one. I mean, what if a landlord ends up, paying that lawsuit because they lose in court because some lawyer's really good at their job on the other side, and then they lose their home? That's gentrification.
Are there, talking about homes, are there foreclosed homes or homes that aren't inhabited at the moment? Are there abandoned houses in the city that could be used as temporary shelters?
Oh, Wells Fargo used to have a fair share of foreclosed homes. I don't know if that still exists now just because so many investors are picking things up, but that's worth an ask.
Yeah, houses go up for sale and in 2 weeks they're gone.
Sure. Are there
There's still
abandoned
vacant
housing?
houses, though.
I don't.
Oh.
Yeah.
I would assume there are a few, I mean, just because there are, but I don't know.
Your
And
code
the other
guys
thing
would
is
know what's
they are-
boarded up.
And it might just be trading one problem for another.
That's
I mean, they
very,
may be
very
abandoned
true.
because
That's
they're not,
very true.
or if they've been ignored for a while, they may not be safe.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what? But if they have been abandoned, well, then the city could have the responsibility of fixing them up, at least to minimal condition, can't they, where they're inhabitable?
In
And
theory.
then charging people
In theory, but
to live there.
when it comes to, and it's a policy decision from the city council, but when it comes to investing affordable housing dollars, it's often more advantageous to invest in something of higher density where you get more units. And also the city's not in a position to manage it, and they leverage more outside sources of funding than buying individual homes that we would then manage. But it's really a city council policy discussion that we're hoping to have with our affordable housing strategy.
Can I ask one
Go
question?
ahead.
We're in a really good space right now, but I got to ask a critical question about the outreach and the training, because I'm not as involved in the community, but I keep my ear open. And when you said you had those workshops, it's not something I knew at all about. Okay. And I'm a homeowner in the gardens, and a lot of folks in the gardens have additional properties, either cottages or converted garages or whatever. So I would think you would blanket the gardens with, here's the notice of what's coming up this workshop.
Sure.
No, not at all. Not at all. So we have 10 social service providers, and we have, say, 3 people being asked to move out of an illegal second unit. We want those 10 social service providers to be able to focus on those 3 people. So we don't want to broadcast it and say, hey, come in and talk to these folks. We want to say, these are the people who are immediately impacted, and we want you to be able to give them your undivided attention. So when we have those workshops, they're for the people being evicted. They're not for the general population.
So is
that
it
is the goal.
possible?
Is to be very
Yes.
focused and to give them as many resources as possible.
But at the same time, is it possible to have workshops to let homeowners know what the codes are, what the requirements are that they have to live up to, so that they can be working on issues right now before there is a complaint that comes in, or before they have to evict their tenants? So I'm thinking, that idea of preparation, that idea of prevention before it becomes a problem.
Yeah,
So-
Marin County did that as part of an amnesty program. Before they rolled out the amnesty program, they informed homeowners, if you have this and you want to qualify for the amnesty program, this is what you have to do. And so folks came up and said, yeah, well, you know, I sort of did convert my garage and didn't get permit. So, you know, as long as I'm not getting penalized and I have to pay whatever the repair fees are to bring it up to code, I'll do that. But there's not additional fees along with it.
And letting people know what the tenant's rights are. I'm thinking so that they can work with the homeowner to make sure that everybody's living amicably before to avoid any problems that might come up. Is it possible? I know the city is doing far more with less than many other cities, but is it possible to have some of those workshops?
Well, it's less with what we had. We have fewer staff now than we did in 2002 in the city. But it certainly is possible, and I think that's a good goal. But in terms of empowering tenants, that's what we do. I mean, that's what we do whether they live in an apartment or if they're a tenant in a single-family home.
Through
we let them
stabilization.
through rent stabilization, and
That's
also
not all rent stabilization does. It helps landlords too. I mean, if you make improvements on your property, you can bring that to the rent stabilization board and get an adjustment on the rent if you need to, if you invested in that property.
So
It's
so
not a
maybe-
one-sided opposite. It's not a one-sided.
Okay, so I mean,
organization.
we have the strongest rent control in Silicon Valley. We have the strongest tenant protections in Silicon Valley, and we communicate that to tenants, whether they're in rent-stabilized units or single-family homes or.
There's a big difference between a multi-unit apartment owner, like when Zell came in and spent $3 million and bought a bunch of apartments, as opposed to somebody that's barely making their mortgage until they get a renter.
Yeah, there's-
Sister Trinitas, we
Yeah.
have just a few seconds left. Is there something you'd like to say?
I have a lot of praying to do. It seems, I mean, I really, I think we really have to work hard to protect our people.
We do have to work hard. Everyone
Together.
needs to, yes,
Together.
Every-
We have to work hard together.
yes. Final
Yes.
words?
Yeah.
We're all working
Thank you
hard
for having
together.
this is an important issue. It's timely. I think we are working together, and I think that at the end of this we'll be better.
Well, it's-
Collectively, the collective we will be better
Yes.
at dealing with these issues.
Yes. I very much appreciate the fact that the three of you have come to talk about it. It's obviously a very complex issue. And we'll be looking forward to the meeting. We'll be looking forward to seeing the resolutions. We know that this is a crisis that will lead to greater opportunities. So thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.